modular synthesis has a reputation for being very complex, very expensive, and often very big. But personally, I much prefer working with a smaller and more compact rig, so I've decided to make a series of videos focusing on small, dedicated Eurorack setups. The first video is going to look at making ambient music with just these 5 modules and a power module in this 40 HP rack. So I'll break down each of the modules in the rack, patch it up from scratch, and then try and demonstrate how versatile and powerful a small, dedicated modular setup can be. If that sounds good, then please stick around. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And yeah, let's dive in to the video. So let's take a closer look at the rack, starting off with this really lovely case, which is actually hand built from a company called Noisy by Nature, who reached out and asked if I'd be interested in any of their cases, and I asked if they would make me a 40 HP case, as I had this sort of mini Eurorack series in mind. I was then able to choose a bunch of different textures. I decided to go for the sunburnt crocodile texture, and yeah, it's really nice, so definitely go and check them out. And in the rack we have, starting from left to right here, the Behringer CP1A power supply. This is more than enough power, especially for a rack this size. I actually use it in my much bigger rack, and it's very affordable, so that's a good place to start. And next we get into the actual music making modules, and the first module here is Pamela's Pro Workout, and this is a bit of a Swiss Army knife of utilities. It has 8 outputs, and we can hit the stop button here to get all 8 of the outputs moving, and these outputs can do multiple different things. The most basic thing it can do is just be a gate signal, something that could turn something on or off or clock a delay, for example, but it can also be an LFO with a bunch of different wave shapes to choose from, or even a sequencer or a pattern generator. There's so many things this can do, and it's one of the most useful modules in all of Eurorack. Next we have the iconic Mutable Instruments Rings, which is a resonator and a physical modeling synthesizer, so it's really good at making organic sounds like bells and chimes and drums and strings. And it's a surprisingly deep module. There's a bunch of sort of Easter eggs and hidden features in here. We can also process external equipment with the external input, and it's just generally a very beautiful sounding module, and it's perfect for making ambient music. Next we have the Expert Sleepers Disting Mark IV. This is another Swiss Army knife kind of module. There are over 100 algorithms in here, from oscillators to filters to sample players, but I'm using it for my stereo VCA. So this is going to be processing rings, bringing it down to sort of line level and allowing it to pass into my 2 effects. The first of my multi-effects is the ALM MFX. There are a bunch of different algorithms in here. We can clock them, we can modulate them, and yeah, effects are going to be vital in a setup of this nature. And finally we have the Happy Nerding Effects Aid, which is another multi-effects. This one has over 200 algorithms that we can choose from. We can only store 32 on this at a time, but they all sound really beautiful, and it's going to work really nicely having the 2 effects together. It's going to allow us to create some really deep and sort of evolving textures. So that is the basic overview of the rack. Now let's patch it up and make some sound. So I'm going to start by taking the output of rings, patching it into my VCA. Then I'll patch the VCA into the MFX. I'm going to take a stereo out from the MFX, as there are quite a few stereo effects in there, into a stereo in on the effects aid. And then I have my output going into my mixer / interface, which is the Zoom L12. And Rings is not going to make any sound until it is excited. So it needs either an audio input into the audio in or a gate into the strum input. So let's get palms moving and we'll take a closer look at how palms work. On the front page we have our BPM, which we can change. And if we scroll along, then we have each of the 8 outputs. Let's go with output number 1, which is set to ×4 of the BPM. And if we press that down, we can dive into the sub menu with loads and loads of crazy stuff we can do. But for this initial usage, we're just going to stick with the square wave gate, patch that into the strum input. And we have sound. Next, I want to use palms to sequence rings. So let's move along to the second output. I'm going to press down on this one again. And for this, we want to find the random output, which kind of looks like a city skyline. And I'm going to patch this into the volt per octave input. So very, very random. Let's bring in some reverb. And let's make this more musical. So the first thing I want to do is find the quantize feature. Here we go. And let's pick pentatonic minor, so it's already sounding more musical. Next, I'm going to bring the level down, and this is just going to restrict the range of notes. Let's go down to about 60%. And finally, I'm going to find the loop beats feature, and this allows us to sort of capture segments of random. And it's now going to loop that random, and it really does turn randomness into a sequence. If you don't like the loop that it's captured, we can always go back to 0 and try again. I actually really like that, that's pretty nice. Next, let's add some modulation. So we're going to go over to output 3. Let's start with something nice and simple. I'm going to choose the sine wave. I'm going to set the modifier to ×3. And we'll patch this into the volt per octave, into the pitch, the frequency input, to get a bit of vibrato. I do want to be quite subtle with that one. Next, I want to add a bit of dynamics to rings. Currently, every note has pretty much the exact same dynamics, so let's add a little bit of variation in here. So I'm going to go to output 4, and I'm going to use the random output again. Let's set this to ×4 of the BPM, and I'm going to use this to modulate the damping, which is kind of like an all-in-one envelope. We can get really snappy sounds or nice open sounds. And what I'm going to do is patch this random output into the damping input to add a bit of variation. That's nice. Next, let's add a bit more extreme modulation. Let's go along to output 5. And for this shape, I'm going to choose the slewed random, which is very similar to random, but it's has nice sort of curved edges. And maybe I'll set the modifier to ×2 for this one. And we'll patch it into the structure. Which again is adding more dynamics. Next, I want to bring in a modulating panner on the MFX, which is an interesting stereo effect. But the first thing I need to do is actually clock this. So I'm going to take a gate out of output 6. Let's just make sure that we've got a square wave here. Yes, we do. I'll set the modifier to ×1. Patch that into the clock input. And then we can activate the effect. Adds a bit of depth to the sound. And yeah, this is sounding great. The final thing I wanted to sort of demonstrate here is we can also use PAMs as a clock for external gear. If you have a drum machine like the KO2 here, which takes an external gate as a clock, then we can patch a clock input and have in-sync drums. Now we still have loads of different modulations that we could do. We could start modulating the effects on the effects aid or effects on the panner. We could even modulate the VCA here, which is actually a stereo low pass gate. If you want to know more about low pass gates, then I'll leave a link to a video up here. But let's try, I don't actually know what's going to happen here, but let's try pop a modulation in here. Getting a bit more dynamics happening. Yeah, that's how to set up a basic patch in this mini ambient system. But next I'd like to see how far we could push it and what kind of musical ideas we can get out of such a small rack. I guess the final thing we can do here is try and change the sequence. So for this patch, I'm using the external input here with the OP1, and the sound from the OP1 is exciting rings and creating sound. So whenever I hit a key on the OP1, rings kind of comes to life. using a piano sound on the OP1, which seems to work very nicely with the external in. Rings can be a bit funny with external inputs. You do need to sort of tweak the parameters for a while to find something that really works, but once you find it, it's a really beautiful sound. I've also got a sequence from palms going into the volt per octave on rings, so whenever I do hit a note on this, you can kind of hear that sequence playing out on rings. When I was rehearsing this before I recorded, I found that it works really nicely with one of the guitar sounds on the Spitfire Labs free VST. So I think to finish this little section, I'm just going to play the same loop again and add a bit of an overdub. I thought I'd try something a little different. For this patch, I'm using the Rings Easter egg mode. I'll leave a link to a video if you want to know more about that. But essentially it is more of a subtractive classic synthesizer kind of sound, and we can choose chords using the structure. Really nice for getting subtle differences in your drones. Another great thing about Rings is when you open the damping all the way up, it will just drone out, and that's what's happening just now. We can of course still sequence this or alternatively use the frequency control. Have Rings then going into the MFX. Actually, I have change things up a little bit in the rack here. I've decided to put the Instro Cure at the end just to get a bit more control over the master volume. And the MFX is running the Bit Commander algorithm, which is a very glitchy kind of skipping CD kind of effect. Really, really cool sounding effect. And then it's going into a Bit Crusher algorithm on the Happy Nerd and Effects Aid. I have a sine wave LFO modulating the Bit Crush on that. Bringing this really crunchy digital vibe. And then finally on the OP1 I'm just playing a VST. Yeah, really totally different kind of sound from the previous patches. So for the final patch today, I'm using another one of Rings' secret modes, which is the FM mode. Once again, I'll leave a link up here if you want to see a deeper dive into that. And I'm using the key step here to control Rings. So I've got a gate and a CV out going into the strum and volt per octave input on Rings. And I do have some modulation going into the brightness and the position parameters, and this is given quite a wide variety of sounds. Some of them are like soft sine waves, other ones are more raspy FM tones. But one of my favourite things about Rings is if you open up the damping, it's going to drone out, and when you're in the poly mode, we can get 4-note chords. And it's really quite epic. And things can get even crazier when we start moving the structure control. You can find sweet spots and not so sweet spots. so much fun. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed my first installment of the mini rack series. If you've got any ideas of small compact racks you'd like to see in the series, let me know. I was thinking of doing a full effects rack, maybe a sampler based rack, perhaps a looper rack. So yeah, any ideas, let me know. If you have enjoyed the video, please leave a like and leave a wee comment to help the algorithm on its way. And if you enjoy what I do and you would like to support my channel, then I do have a Patreon where I upload extra videos as well as sample and preset packs. You can sign up to that for as little as £3 a month, and it really helps me out so much. I also have an online store with bits and bobs you can pick up. I have a couple of albums for sale. You can grab physical or digital versions on Bandcamp. And finally, I have some affiliate links as well. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon. Take care.